Dave in, so
Yeah.
just,
Oh, he should have the link.
you might just have a,
So no Eddie, no Judith, or are they online?
Judith will not be here. I'm not sure about Eddie.
Judith.
We need some more people in the planning commission.
We'll talk about that too.
Please,
Yeah,
we need reinforcements.
Yeah. Make them go to a meeting.
There he is.
Of course, yes.
Everybody on that side of the.
Yes, of course.
Dave, can you hear us okay?
Yay.
Figure, there I go. You guys got me?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, it's David. It's time to get going, isn't it? We're late. Chop, chop, chop. Or do we have a quorum? I can't tell.
We do. There's 4 of us here and then what you remote.
Okay, super. All right, let's get going. City of Lacey Planning Commission meeting of October 3rd, call to order. Roll call. We have a quorum. Who are we missing tonight?
Judy will not be here. Eddie, I'm not sure about. I don't know if Eddie has said something and I just can't remember or not.
Okay,
And then we are without 2 positions, so that would be it.
Yep. Okay, great. So I'm looking for a motion to accept the approval of the agenda and consent agenda items.
So moved.
Second. Daphne Red, second.
Okay, and who did the first?
Me, Gail.
Oh, great. All righty. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carries. Public comment. Ryan?
Oh, we don't have anybody in the audience here at City Hall, and I don't see anybody in the attendees on the Zoom, but just in case, if anybody wants to address the planning commission, this is your opportunity to do it. Use the
Okay.
raise hand function of the webinar, and we'll go ahead and bring you in. Other than Chair Wasson, I think.
Yeah. Just I was giving the public the sample how to do that.
Okay, there you go. No public comment tonight.
Okay, no public comment. We will move on to commission reports. Gail?
Nothing. I attended a delightful meeting with the County Planning Commission. Thank you.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, my only report is it okay if we make a comment on that last meeting that we had with the Thurston County Planning Commission, or is that gonna be a topic?
You can, I'm gonna bring it up during the department report.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is one thing that kind of came up that I was a little surprised by. It seemed as though the county is very eager to have Lacey annex more property in the urban growth area. I was never under that impression they were eager for that. I always thought, well, there might be a fight. I know we've been reluctant in the past to do it because of the cost that might be involved, but the Martin Way corridor is all commercial. Is there any reason why we wouldn't want to annex all that because of all the potential sales tax advantage?
Yeah, really, as far as the sales tax and property tax revenue, if you look at the urban growth area as a whole, really Martin Way is really where the bulk of that potential revenue lies. And we have looked at it. The issue with annexing Martin Way is that we can't just annex the Martin Way corridor kind of as a strip. We can't keep an unincorporated island. So in doing that, we have to take Thompson Place, which is on the north side of Martin Way, and Tanglewild that's on the south side. And by annexing those, we've kind of analyzed that, and we need to update this. We've actually done an annexation study that looked at, and the numbers are a little bit old, that if we annex it, it will be a net impact to the city budget of between $1 and $2 million. The reason being is that the revenue from the Martin Way corridor retail or commercial doesn't support the additional services that will be needed to serve the residential. So things like police service and public works and code enforcement, the additional staff that it takes to work to address those things are that would be needed, the cost of which is pretty high. So that's the primary reason why at this point it's still, not super high on the priority list. The rest of the urban growth area is primarily residential, and that pretty much residential is almost always a net deficit to a city budget. And so, while it sounds good and it sounds, it's, I guess, advantageous to regularizing our boundaries. It's by annexing our whole urban growth area would be a huge burden on our city budget. And essentially, we would annex 30,000 new residents, which means we need 30,000 residents worth of service. And to think Lacey not too long ago, and I could probably remember when this was that, we had, our city was 30,000 people, and now we've doubled that population. So it would be a big impact, and something we would definitely have to ramp up to and go into with eyes wide open before we
You're
do
talking
that.
about the whole UGA, right?
Correct. Yeah.
But it would be worthwhile to go back and look at Tanglewild and Thompson Place and the urban corridor.
Yeah, so there are, since we did that study, there are additional, we'll see, discussions underway between the city council and the board of county commissioners on what the city's role is in that Martin Way corridor area. And one of the options is potentially that we would take over permitting responsibilities for that area. And or we would annex the whole thing, annex the corridor and Tanglewild Thompson Place. And before we do that, though, we need to update that study. And we need to look at, in today's numbers, which things have changed a lot in 5 or 6 years as far as the cost of service and revenue projections, is that we need to update that study. But in what you attended the other night in updating the joint plan, another part of it is making sure that our codes and regulations and policies are all consistent.
Right.
And we haven't had consistency. They're still working off a 2003 plan. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different things as far as the revenue situation goes, the services, but then also the kind of the codes and regulations part as well.
Well, that explains to me why we've been reluctant and why they're so eager.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess suppose if we do relook at it, it should be on the table as to whether we should have them no longer be urban growth areas. If could that be part of the discussion as to, if we don't anticipate annexing them in some short time, maybe
Yes.
we just give them back to the county.
And that's part of the discussion over the McAllister geologic sensitive area and Pleasant Glade areas that, there's some utility service issues out there that we're not, going to be serving them anytime in the near future. So it may make sense to reduce our urban growth area for those areas that aren't likely to annex anytime in the future.
Sounds like a subject that needs a lot further discussion in the future. So, all righty. The next, I'm having a little trouble seeing who's okay. The next commissioner who would like to tell us their.
The only thing I have, and I can't find the article, but it did get brought up in the meeting about converting office space, and I'll try to find the article, but a lot of the issues that cities are dealing with, and it seems like an easy, simple solution, but it isn't, and it's costly, and there are things that, like, what is owed on the property or what the property is purchased for, what they could ultimately turn around. So I'll try to bring it in, but I think that just that might be some sort of thing that we need to probably do some education on, that these empty office buildings aren't just, make them into apartments.
Yeah,
Look at this cool
right,
loft.
exactly.
It doesn't work that well. And there are a lot of constraints, both in the design as well as the financial motivation for builders to do so.
All righty. And is Kieran there?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, nothing to report, but yeah, I did work at a school who had bought a office building and tried to convert it. But they couldn't, they had to tear the whole thing down because the stairwells and the whole infrastructure just wasn't up to code for what they were trying to, so. Yeah, it's hard to be able to make those conversions.
All righty. And I have nothing to report other than it's good to be here, even though I'm distant. Sorry about that. Next, we will move on to department report.
Yeah, so I have a few things to touch on tonight. The first is I wanted to talk a little bit about planning commission vacancies and some of the terms that are coming up. So we do currently have 2 vacancies with Peg's vacancy as well as Kathy Marcia's vacancy as well. And it appears that at this Thursday's council meeting that the council will be appointing former city councilman Jeff Gadman. So Jeff will most likely be appointed to the planning commission on Thursday night. If so, then that'll bring us to 8. And so we still have a vacancy related to Kathy's position. And then 2, we're working as well towards reappointments for next year. So reached out, Kirian is willing to take on another term on the planning commission. And Mark, when we reached out to Mark, and Mark is saying no at this point to being on the commission for another 3 years. And Mark made me aware too that, and I've forgotten that you've been almost 2 full terms. You've been on for almost 6 years at
Yeah, I
this
came
point.
on March after what would have been, if it had been January, been a full term. So it'll be 5 years and 9 months at the end of this year.
Yeah, so almost 2 full terms, and you'd be eligible for 3 more years if you'd like.
Hey, it isn't because I haven't enjoyed working with this group and honored to work with the group. It's just, it's time for me to move on and pass the torch to someone younger.
Well, really appreciate your time, Mark, and yeah, it's been fantastic working with you for the last 3 years, or for the last almost 6 years. And then our chair, our formidable chair, Dave Wasson, has come out at the end of the year. So we will actually have 3 vacancies as of the first of the year, with one of them being Mark's urban growth area position, 2 in the city limits. So if you are aware, I guess this is kind of a plug as well, if you're aware of neighbors, friends that either live in the city limits or in the Lacey urban growth area that are potentially interested in serving on the planning commission, maybe, see if you can nudge them into applying. So we have on our city's website, the ability to apply for our boards and commissions on our city website now. So I would suggest that you kind of get the word out. We're trying to do that as a city as well. So the Facebook posts and the press releases and those kinds of things. We're also, I'm going to be at the Equity Commission coming up towards the end of the month to provide information on the Planning Commission and kind of promote our vacancies and see if we can get people that are interested through our Equity Commission. And they have a lot of people there with diverse viewpoints, which is great. And so they're tapped into other parts of the community. So maybe we'll be able to use some angles there as well. So anyway, so we're getting some new people on board. We'll have some more after the first of the year, hopefully, and spread the word if you can. Another thing, kind of just on the overall operation of the Planning Commission, I have been following that the City Council is actually going to be, I think they had a briefing on last Thursday night to consider moving their regular meeting times from Thursday to Tuesday. And so what I would like tonight is just a brief discussion to consider, and this doesn't have to be a final answer or anything, but just kind of what your preferences are on day of the week for Planning Commission meetings after the first of the year, because Tuesday will no longer be an option. And so what I will do is give me a second to share screen on Zoom so Dave can see this as well. And I apologize, it's gonna
Yeah, I can't. I think Friday nights at 6 would be great, starting the first of the year.
You don't get a vote anymore. So hopefully, Dave, you can see this. This is a
I
little,
can.
but it basically shows all of our different city meetings throughout the week. And
Tuesday.
let's see, Tuesday is, that's where we're, so this is current, right? So this is not after the council changes. The council's currently got work sessions and regular meetings on Thursdays. Tuesdays is a pretty packed night, but they're gonna be moving, and this also considers, what other councils are doing. So this will put all of our North Thurston County cities on Tuesday nights, with Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey all meeting on Tuesday nights. So at this point, the options would be Monday night, Wednesday night, or Thursday night. My personal preference, and I'll let you guys talk about it, your preferences as well, is Monday night. I am partial to having the meetings earlier in the week rather than later. And at this point, if we did meet on Mondays, there is a JazzCom meeting here on the first Monday of the month that we would need to ask them to adjust. And there's also, so that's if we keep our first and third on a Monday, that we would have to ask JazzCom to move. And then if we were second and fourth Mondays, we do have an equity commission in this room on the fourth Monday of the month. So they would have to move as well. If you look at Wednesdays, first and third are already taken up with Parks Board on the first Wednesday, and then the third Wednesday is the Historical Commission. Second and fourth Wednesdays would be available. And then Thursdays are pretty wide open because the council had this room pretty much taken up, from 6 o'clock on for all their council meetings and work sessions. So with that, happy to turn it over to you all to discuss at this point. Like I said, my preference would be Mondays, and it kind of would keep, my preference would be the first and third Mondays to kind of keep that consistent, but don't know if people have other
There's only
commitments.
2 of us here that are staying, is that right? Period.
Well, and Daphne.
Yes, it's-
Sorry, Daphne, you're staying, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
It's a good time to decide. When there's fewer people.
And we don't have to decide right now. I just wanted to start that discussion, and what this will actually take is, we'll actually have to amend the planning commission bylaws, because that's what's adopted your meeting time. So I'll need to amend those and then bring those back for final adoption. And in doing that, that'll formally change your meeting time.
Do Mondays affect like public participation, notifications, those kinds of things? It's earlier in the week, and I just wonder if it would affect that.
No, it doesn't really change anything as far as any of our notice procedures or anything like that. Really, all that is, since we have a daily newspaper at the Olympian, basically we can just put everything in a day earlier than we normally would. So it's no big deal from that standpoint. Really, it's down to your all kind of preferences as far as what day of the week. Tuesday's not an option, I guess, but other
But
than
the
that,
others are, but not Friday, please.
yeah,
I
not
have
for me.
commitments on the first Wednesday and sometimes on the second Monday of the month.
Say that again, Carrie, on the fourth and second and fourth Mondays are not good.
No, I mean, the fourth isn't good. Sometimes the second, but it waxes and wanes.
Monday
And are
is
the first and
not a
third Mondays
preference for
open?
me. Mondays are hard at work, and it's just typically a pretty busy, stressful day, so it'd be my least favorite, but I'm open to Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Gail?
Yeah, I actually would prefer either Monday or Wednesday,
Okay,
I think. But these guys work, so, I don't work, so I can move stuff around, but I think the later in the week it gets, the later it gets. It's not, I don't want to have something late in the week particularly. 'Cause I'll be,
My Wednesday nights are very flexible. So
Or
Wednesdays are good for you.
Wednesdays are good. Wednesdays, Daphne, okay. So it looks like, at this point, the second and fourth Wednesdays are wide open, and that wouldn't require us to change anything.
So it'd be the same weeks essentially.
Because right now we do first and third.
First and third, so it'd be second and fourth.
Yeah.
That's all right,
Okay,
at 6.
to be,
Is that what you,
what's that, Dave?
is that all you needed, Ryan, was to get an idea and then?
Yeah, I just wanted to start the discussion and then, I think once we have, I'll bring it up again, maybe next meeting as well, and just, since we'll have more planning commission members here and kind of figure that out, but it sounds like we're kind of leaning towards second and fourth Wednesdays would be the most convenient for people here and then also for our existing meeting schedule.
Has the council actually decided that they're switching or they're talking about it?
They haven't formally decided on it yet, but
Pretty
based on the
much.
discussions on Thursday night, I think it's pretty certain that come January, that they will be moving.
Okay.
And it does kind of make sense that they move based on all the other
Stuff. that's-
cities happening on Tuesday, so I can see the reasoning there.
Great. And then the last item that I was gonna bring up was a meeting, or a debrief on our meeting at Thurston County last week. Thank you all for spending your time and dedicating your time to that. It was, I guess what I'll just kind of focus on is my understanding of some of the recommendations that were made, which were, I think, kind of at times confusing. And the main one that I took away was basically the lack of recommendation on the plan to the Board of County Commissioners. So the way that the vote worked was that it was my understanding was it was a 4-2 vote to recommend to the board approval of the plan. But the way the parliamentary procedures work with the planning commission there is that it needs to be, I believe, a vote of 5 or more to pass something forward to the Board of County Commissioners, because
So they didn't do anything.
so they didn't do anything because it was basically a failure. It went down because they require a majority of all of their planning commissioners to vote in favor of something, regardless of how many people are actually at the meeting. Versus, so it's a different parliamentary procedure than we use, which is like tonight, we've got 5 planning commission members, and if 3 of the 5 planning commission members vote something forward, then that's going to be the vote, right? Versus requiring, we've got 9 planning commission seats. In order to move anything forward, we would need all 5 of you to vote affirmatively for something.
So all of those things that they voted on are null and void?
No, there were some that moved forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I was listening to it and was wondering when they had a majority where it still didn't pass.
Yeah, because I was talking to Hans, like I was sitting right next to Hans, and I was like, did that pass?
Yeah.
And the planning commission chair was so staunchly like, well, that failed, and I
Yeah,
was like,
right.
I thought that was a 4-2 vote. So we reached back out to planning commission, or the staff of their planning commission, they said, yeah, that is how they, deal with their parliamentary procedures part of things. Other
many-
things,
How many people did they have there? I'm trying to
There are
count.
2 online,
And
and
for
one
1,
person.
2, 3,
So did they have 2 of
4
them?
there,
Okay, so 6 total.
6 altogether. I don't know how many they have altogether.
I don't recall.
I believe they have 9.
The
They have
previous
three
meeting,
three per commissioner district.
the previous meeting, they only had that many people show as well. So,
Oh my God.
But they
so
didn't
they've been
formally
up to
vote on any
15.
recommendations.
correct. So, okay.
There were other recommendations or lack of recommendations. One thing that they voted to not move forward with was the low density zone consolidation, which, I can come up with a million reasons why it should be. They had their own philosophy behind it. And I think once we get to the county commission, I'm fairly certain that they will, they will move that forward. And the reason being, my primary reason for believing that is we are required to basically have the same rules and regulations, whether you're in the urban growth area or in the city. So the city has that low density zone. And so therefore the county should have the same zone. And the idea is that we shouldn't have different zoning districts and different development regulations associated with them. So I think that'll play itself out. There was also some,
How does that happen though? How does the required part of it come before the council and happen if they didn't support it and their recommendation is plan?
Yeah, good question. So what we'll do, I think in preparation for the briefing with the board is go back and pull up.
So you and the city will brief them?
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll be there as well to assist the
With
county
their
staff.
own staff? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so where it comes from is the countywide planning policies that require that. That's a document that we've all kind of adopted that sets forth the kind of the rules associated with planning together under the Growth Management Act. So that's one thing. Plus, we also have an agreement that goes back to basically the mid-90s that this kind of sets forth how joint planning works. And part of that is that the urban growth areas will develop under the same rules and regulations as if they were in the city limits. And their planning commission got into this kind of philosophical discussion about, well, maybe we should just say that you shouldn't be able to develop here until it's annexed, right? And that's not the idea. The idea is that it's to develop it in the urban growth area as if it was in the city. And
Seamless, yeah.
yeah, and then at the point of annexation, then it has already been developed at a city level of service.
They were talking about sprawl, right?
They were,
Which didn't seem to, didn't make sense to me when we're talking about the UGA.
right, yeah. And that's where I think they were kind of tended to talk in circles a little bit, and it was hard to follow some of that discussion. Some of the rezones as well, they forwarded on some with recommendations and some that they didn't. And it's a little concerning that they made some recommendations like the one on, there was a mine site that they voted to not move forward with. It's not an active mine, and so
No.
the appropriate zoning is for residential, and they kind of were getting into arguments or discussions about what the future development of that property should look like. And so anyway, the next steps will be we'll be assisting the county staff in briefing the Board of County Commissioners. The Board of County Commissioners are going to have a work session, I believe, in a couple weeks on this. And then they will be conducting their own public hearing and taking their own testimony and then making their own decision on adoption of the joint plan by the end of this year. We're also working on drafting up essentially a letter of affirmation that says the city believes that the joint plan should be adopted, that we went through a robust public participation plan, that we've got all these associated documents that support it, like our pedestrian bicycle plan and the Martin Way corridor study and all these housing action plans, our affordable housing strategy, to support all these things. And so we'll kind of bring that all up and push it forward to the Board of County Commissioners.
Where does county staff, are they resting with adoption of the plan? Is that going to be their recommendation as well?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah. So the county staff has been supportive of this. I think, even though it's taken us a long time to get through this, I'm grateful for the county staff to get us to this point, because they've done a lot of good work as well. And I think unfortunately they're kind of stuck dealing with some of the conflict on their planning commission. And so they're kind of stuck in the middle sometimes. But we're thankful for all the work that the county staff has done getting us this far, and see that they'll be recommending that the board approve it as well.
And so we have a date for where you're going to brief. You said October 17th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So they could feasibly vote on it on that day?
No, so after that briefing, then they'll go and hold their
Oh, the
public hearing.
hearing.
Yeah, and then adopt it as part of their annual slate of comprehensive plan amendments, which will be done sometime around the end of this year.
So in comment to some of the criticism about talking about what events and things like that, is that something that needs to be, will the county take that on as far as, because most of the public hearing was about specific individual zoning issues, nothing to do with the
With the
adoption
plan
of the
itself.
plan
Right.
itself. And the comments, if you read the comments, it didn't appear that I don't recall, were on point to the adoption of the plan.
Right.
So will they do some of the outreach on that, or does City of Lacey do that? That seemed to be an important point for a couple of them.
The public outreach part.
Yes.
So the public outreach, the city is not going to be doing any additional public outreach. And the reason being is that, and I hopefully this was clear, is
I
that
understood.
this is a plan that we had adopted in 2016. And so most of our outreach was done in 2014 and 15. We're gearing up for our next comprehensive plan update. So why would we now go back and, touch on stuff that we've
I mean,
adopted
Perfect sense.
7-8 years ago?
Perfect sense.
I don't get the impression that that was something that their planning commission quite understood. And so what we'll do is we'll make it clear when we go in front of the board, the robust public participation that we did 7 or 8 years ago, to lead up to the adoption of the plan. Because, our perspective is that we, and Hans has done a great job of putting together online materials, and we've attended, the county fair and other events to remind people of what's been done. And we haven't gotten a lot of people that have participated anyways. And so, to go back out on a almost 10-year-old plan at this point for additional public participation just wouldn't make sense.
Will they need to do for the county?
No, I don't think at this point we're gonna do any additional.
Would they do any? The county do any?
No, I don't think so. At this point, it's packaged up and ready to go to the board. And so the only remaining public participation part of this would be a public hearing with the board.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Dave.
I was just saying, I think there's just a misunderstanding of what we were trying to accomplish. We had that same misunderstanding on a few of our people that first time we met, that they didn't quite understand it either. And I think in retrospect, I have a feeling they have some of those same challenges. Do we have to address the Yelm housing thing at all, Ryan?
No, that was kind of a concerning comment because the impression was that we hadn't done anything on the
I
housing.
know.
But in fact, we have adopted a housing action plan almost 2 years ago. And so we're 2 years ahead of Yelm. Yelm's housing action plan is largely based on our own. And so those comments were just totally baseless. And I didn't get into an argument with their planning commission about the stuff we had done related to housing. Just let them have that comment and move on, because we've done significantly more in the housing than Yelm. Pushing that forward, that's a comment that, kind of similar to the comments about how they felt like the center of Lacey should densify. We have, had plans on the books to do that for the better part of 20 years. And by the way, we're doing it now. Just look at some of those projects that are coming up, coming online.
Yeah.
So the comments about Lacey sprawl, I mean, some of it I just kind of had to let go and not get into any kind of argument with. And I think getting back to Dave's point is that really the planning commission, the Thurston County Planning Commission's role in this is almost performative. It's almost just like they need to go through the process of taking this through the county, but the city takes the lead on updating the plans for the urban growth areas, and that's set forth in countywide planning policies. And I think maybe that information would have helped them, except that this is now the 4th joint plan that they've gone through. So if they haven't, now are they going to get it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was definitely confusing, considering that they just finished Tumwater or whoever they did last, or Tenino. I can't remember which one they did last, but yeah, it seemed like, these are kind of, in a roundabout way, a bit of a rubber stamp, because it's a process that we've been following for years. So it is a little confusing.
Right.
So it will be though important, because obviously we want to be introspective and learn from maybe a meeting that didn't go as well as, or wasn't as productive as we'd hoped, but will it be necessary or appropriate for Lacey City staff to address most of their points and just providing, so maybe simplifying what we're trying to accomplish, maybe taking out the noise that is unrelated and such, and just focus introspectively, I'm not sure if we could have had a different outcome or not, but it was, disappointing that we didn't get the outcome we'd looked for. And so I think we would want to learn from that, of course, and try to approach it maybe more simply.
Yeah. all really good points, and that's, you know, a crucial part of us, you know, being involved in 2 weeks is to, you know, provide that background information that, and, you know, like I said, the county staff were really appreciative of the job that they've done, but, you know, they don't know as much as we do as what's gone into all that. So happy to help and kind of clarify and communicate things a little bit better maybe than were communicated to their planning commission.
So I have a totally separate question, which is now that there are going to be 5 commissioner districts, are there going to be 15 people on the county planning commission?
I don't know the exact details. They're working it out right now. My understanding is that there will be a certain number within each district and then a couple extra like at-large seats. So I'm not exactly sure how many members they will
How many
have.
that will be when it
Yeah,
all
when it's
shakes
all
out.
said and done, but I know that they're working through that right now.
Interesting.
Something for Mark to do, maybe.
Hmm?
Something for Mark to do in the future. Sorry, Mark.
Go to your room.
Yeah. Okay, any questions for Ryan?
We asked them all already, so.
Yeah. And as a planning commission, Ryan, you and your staff did a great job and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
and the feeling's mutual. Thanks to all of
Yeah.
you for everything you do on your end.
Yep. There is not a public hearing this evening and there is no new business. I'm extremely excited to go into old business. We have Jennifer Adams, the housing coordinator, and she's going to be talking about the home park, manufactured home park survey. Lots of interesting data collected in that survey. And of course, a lot of those areas are right along, you know, I remember seeing a number of them on the Martin Way corridor. So, and so we will open the floor for Jennifer. Thank you.
So,
So click down on this for my notes and click the button.
yep.
for this.
Or if you want me to, I can click forward.
So- Oops, I already messed it up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so which one is it forward?
That- just like that one.
Perfect, and then back is,
You hit right click and then hit back.
okay, fantastic.
Great. So we have Jennifer Adams, our housing coordinator, back with you all tonight. She was here a few months ago with Gordon, our intern, to give you some information on manufactured home park preservation. And we had Gordon as our intern providing kind of a little bit of a strategy on what we might be able to do and addressing mobile and manufactured home park preservation. At that meeting, the Plan Commission requested a little bit more information before making any major recommendations, and as a part of that, asked for additional outreach to the park residents themselves. So this last summer, Jennifer did a survey, which she'll talk about the results of, that provide a little bit more information on data related to manufactured home park, mobile and manufactured home park residents that I think will be really helpful for the discussion. And then we'll have some kind of potential future options at the end of the presentation for a path forward. So with that, turn over to Jennifer.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be back. Hi, Chair Wasson.
Hello,
You can hear me
welcome.
okay?
I can hear you great.
Okay, perfect. Smaller group than the last time I was here. It's smaller,
Keep
the
getting
shrinking
smaller.
group. Yeah, we'll get decisions made more quickly. Okay, well, it's really nice to be back, and I do have some prepared notes, so I'll probably work my way through those. Maybe go off course here and there, and just let me know if you need me to pause or have any questions in between. So here we are, just continuing our previous conversation that we had in June, as Ryan was mentioning, with our intern Gordon, who did some fantastic work to present to Planning Commission on our mobile home manufactured parks. And so what I'd love to do is, here we go. Sorry, I've got two clicks here, two different clickers. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of gratitude, and out of the responses or the comment box, on the survey, I did like this comment. I'm glad to know that Lacey is seriously studying the ever increasing lack of affordable housing as well as low income housing. It should matter to all of us, not just to those who are struggling. And I really appreciated hearing that. So let's just move right on to this one. So I just want to take a little bit of time here and go back through a little bit of what Gordon shared the first time that we were here. So in summary, our research and discussions at the June meeting highlighted several pressing concerns within our manufactured home park communities. Many residents are worried about the future viability of these parks as a source of affordable housing. However, it is important to note that not all parks share this same concern. We do have a number of parks within Lacey city boundaries as well as the UGA. That have restrictive covenants and therefore are more exclusive and inhibit diversity across income classes. The majority of our local park residents, though, are facing some serious threats, as we know, particularly those with fixed incomes or incomes that are struggling to keep pace with the rising space rents and with other housing related expenses. Key concerns included arbitrary space rent increases, which make it challenging to budget and to prepare for upcoming housing costs. Additionally, there's a noticeable lack of investment in our park infrastructure, which has led to poor conditions in terms of roads, open spaces, and in some cases, water and sanitation systems. Again, pointing out that that is more specific to the parks that are found in the UGA. The split ownership tenure in many parks does limit the residents' ability to own the land beneath their home, which reduces their long-term security and any sense of control over their housing stability or situations. So moreover, residents are vulnerable to park closures when owners decide to sell for more profitable land uses, resulting often in displacement and the loss of much needed affordable housing in our community here in Lacey. Did I go one too far? I apologize here for being a little clunky. So let me just go back here. Oh, there we go. So the threat of park closures, this is not a recent development. And it's been actually a nationwide concern for almost 2 decades. And these closures often result from development pressure and driven by the desire for maximum land use profitability. Unfortunately, historic stigmatization of manufactured home parks and the absence of park-specific zoning have worked against these communities. The Department of Commerce tracks data, which is very, very helpful. And they've got a lot of great data on manufactured home parks. So I definitely encourage anybody to check out their website if there's anything that you'd like to dig a little bit deeper into. And so since 2008, I just wanted to point out that in Washington state, there have been a reported 72 parks that have closed. And that's a pretty significant loss statewide for us of affordable housing across those 2 decades. And while these closures have opened up opportunities for commercial and other higher density housing developments, they've also led to, there again, the displacement of so many people in our state. So this trend over time decreased the availability of affordable housing, as I was mentioning. And then this map I just pulled from the Commerce site, and these are sites of new notices of upcoming closures, and just found it interesting that they're hitting the I-5 corridor, so they're here, and they do not discriminate, right? So.
Do you know how many parks there are in totality in Washington state to get some perspective on the 72?
That's a great question. Can I come back to you with that information?
And then
Yeah,
also, do we know how many were maybe opened? Were any opened? Do we know?
that's
any-
also a great question. So could you jot down a couple of notes
Sure.
for me? Would you mind?
Yeah, for sure.
Happy to get back to you with that. Thank you. Great question. Okay, so this is just a little differently here. We're kind of dealing with a different way than I had this set up before. And then again, just reminding us of a recent House bill that passed this year, that Gordon and I talked about, which offers the first right of refusal to park residents, should a notice of closure, move forward. So, we have to be cautious though to remember that this is a great step to take, although this is not a panacea to preventing any kind of park closure. And with that, just wanted to show you here the list again from Commerce of upcoming park closures for this year already in 2023. Already, you won't see on the list, but last Friday there was another notice for a park closure in Gig Harbor. So there, we'll have to see. It may be too soon with this bill to know if there's going to be any unintended consequences of that. And, there's one slide off. And, excuse me. Yeah.
That right of first refusal is a nice thing to have, but the people that are living in a manufactured home park probably don't have the resources to get legal representation. And really, and they have got to organize, be able to pull something like that off.
So much, Mark, you make such an incredible point. As well as when you start looking into the provisions of the bill, there's so very limited time. The first 30 days, they have to come up with a certain percentage of, and this is market rate, right? So it's not as though the residents get the first right to purchase at a reduced cost. It just has to go into the pool of all, other offers to be considered essentially. So you make a great point. How does that happen? It would need, an awful lot of resources. So
It seems like in previous research, there was the Northwest Cooperative Development that specialized in, they called it resident-owned communities.
yes.
That were using, they were using some state funds and some other pots of funds to be able to, use that so that residents could buy their own communities. But really what it took when we were reaching out to them, they said, it really took a good faith effort from the current owner to want to sell to their residents, right? Because they wanted to do right by the people that live there. I think, while the state law is heading in the right direction, it doesn't necessarily, require that somebody sell, to their, they have the opportunity. And really what we heard was like really it took the initiative of the current owner to want to sell to their tenants to make it happen. So it's kind of interesting. It's like I said, it's moving in the right direction, but really it's still beyond the resources of most
Token
people.
legislation.
That's, so it's nice that we're all sort of feeling the same in terms of this is just not something that's going to stand alone and solve all of our problems. So just again, recapping the things that Gordon presented to us here, I wanted to just talk for just a quick moment about the average space rent. So again, when Gordon went out, one of his major goals was to do an assessment of the risk that a park has to facing closure, so the closure risk. And so he identified, and I didn't bring all of that information back with me today, but I just wanted to hit upon the average space rent. So we had kind of that number as we go into some of our survey results. Now these are just 12 parks within Lacey City boundaries. The rest were in the UGA, which I don't have data for that. So I would say, a good guess in looking at those numbers is, probably right around the $650 to $700 a month for space rent for the majority of parks. Mountain Greens is kind of an outlier there at $900. And I just did want to share that during the survey period, I had such an incredible opportunity to talk to so many residents that were out and about, which was, part of the reason for the chosen method of survey delivery. And Mountain Greens, I had many people upset about their rent already up over $1,000. So that has moved since Gordon's numbers about 5 months ago. It's already moved to a lot of homeowners there. So
Bridging like from our earlier conversation about the number of units per acre kind of thing. You know, mobile homes range from like small travel trailers in spaces to, you know, ranch style homes with, you know, 1,200-1,500 square feet. So I'm wondering, you know, if I've got, you know, single travel trailers, I can put a lot more on, say, an acre than I can a full home with a driveway and such. So how does that play into that? Because Mountain Greens is like, they're full, like big homes, ranch style homes, correct?
They
They're,
are, I think, our biggest park within the city.
but they're not
yes.
like a travel trailer or a
Most-
single wide or anything
A
like
lot
that.
of single wides, I would say probably, well, I'm trying to think back, definitely double wides, and there are a lot of single wides.
Okay.
And then in Mountain Greens as well, more recently, the owner has developed extended, well, there was some portion of the site that was not developed, and the owner has developed those, and I haven't gotten information as to who owns the home, but 10 new homes have been placed at the edge of the development, still within the mobile home development, and they are manufactured homes, but they're double and triple wides, you know, probably on the much higher end of the price range.
I'm just
and
thinking, some of those rents could be for a very small slip of space that, you know, versus, you know, so the relativity of $600 if I'm putting a travel trailer and I have room to park one.
It is in Lakeview Meadows, the one there that's at the bottom is $639 a month. Lakeview Meadows is our newest manufactured home community off 37th Avenue, kind of by Camacha Middle School. And it's brand new units. I think most of them are double wides. And the reason it is so low is because it's subsidized by so you buy the manufactured home and put it on their lot, and then they subsidize the amount of space rent. So that space rent probably should go for well above probably $1,000 a month, but the company that's developing those is actually subsidizing the space rent. So there are other factors. In addition to the amount of space, there's other things like, is anybody subsidizing your rent? Maybe through like, you know, buying something from somebody. How many spaces have utilities included versus those that have to pay for their own water and sewer? So you're right. Not all spaces are created equal. So it's just something to keep in mind when you see this slide and look at the space rent, that there's other factors at play and not everything's equal.
You drive by and some of them, it's a very small plot of land that they're, you know, very small home on it, very small extra storage or so.
And to your point, or just additional information, again, in conversations, and we'll probably share a lot of tidbits just because I felt like that was a very rich experience and that brings us some more information. But I did hear, you know, some concerns, some complaints about, I have such a small lot and I'm paying the same space rent as, you know, this.
Somebody who's got a-
Exactly, with more square footage in their lot space. And so I think you make there again, a really good point and some more areas that we could do some more research there as well.
Do we have anyone asking for a permit to build more of these parks?
No, not in the city limits. There's no current applications or anything pending for any new parks.
So this problem is going to get much worse from the standpoint of monthly rents, because if you start taking away 2 or 3 of these, the supply and demand,
Yeah.
the price is going to go way up, right? We're just looking at the tip of the iceberg as far as this problem goes.
Yeah, and we don't have really in the city limits, at least, we don't really have any available land to do parks on, to
make
do.
it,
I mean, not even to do single family development, let alone, you know, manufactured home parks. So, you know, for us, it's really gonna be looking at redevelopment. You know, maybe aggregating a bunch of parcels together, tearing down old stuff and putting in new is really, you know, that's kind of the future of development at least in the city limits.
Some of the reading that I've been doing also has indicated, and I heard, maybe you were talking about it, Daphne, a little bit of a tough sell to developers. in this market right now. To, go the direction of putting in a manufactured home park. So that's, another thing to consider, even if we did have the land. It's yeah, it's tough against other options that are yielding higher profits. Okay, so what ultimately happened in our last visit is the planning commission so thoughtfully requested some more information. And so that is what our planning staff did. And again, we had a great opportunity to do a survey. So we went out in the summer months. I do say we because this is a we team. It was just me doing the door-to-door survey, and I just chuckle because it was a big undertaking. And again, I think that, the desire there was a couple of things. One was, sort of public facing. And I think that was very beneficial because of the feedback that I was getting. Again, when I opened with the gratitude, I got a lot of that. Once people decided that I wasn't there to make them pay more taxes or to close their park or, any of those things. Yeah, and so then people softened a bit and most people were willing to start having a discussion and realize that we had, that I was there to address concerns that they have as well, and that we share in those concerns. And so, again, it was very, I felt in that regard, it was very beneficial. And so we did, I do estimate that I hit every park, estimated that at about 1,200 doors. So it did take me about, across, I'd say 3 to 4 weeks during the summer months, doing that. And again, just very rich experience, except for the days when it was in the 90s was really, those days were challenging doing that. But, and then while this method was time consuming, again, just led to, I think, some information tonight that will give us more to discuss in the future as we continue forward. So there were 10 questions on the survey. Some of them we didn't get conclusive data. So I have pulled out those questions where I feel like we did get some great things that we can discuss. And so the most basic question and how the survey started out was, do you rent or own your home? And so when asked this, responses generally aligned with some assumptions that staff had regarding home ownership and understanding the split tenure in the parks. And so we did expect by and large that most people owned their home rather than renting it. And that is what we saw here with the response. And by the way, I failed to tell you that the response yielded about a 10%, maybe just less than 10%. Yeah. And so, is that fantastic? Maybe not, but it's certainly a start. Gives us some talking points. And so about 85% of respondents said that they owned their home. And which is great news when we're talking, we're in our housing agendas, we're also talking about paths towards home ownership, right? But when we take just a little closer look at that, staff also aim to identify homeowners within the manufactured parks and understand the range of their monthly payments. But the findings revealed that over 50% of those that said they own their home, so the 85% that said that they own their home, 50% reported that they no longer had a mortgage, indicating that they own their home free and clear. And while this is to me what is the important point is that while this is really encouraging, this is a sign of home ownership, it also only tells part of the story because we must also consider the unintended consequences of owning a manufactured home in a park that could close or that, let's say, does close. So in this situation, so it presents a very complex set of challenges because the home would need to be relocated, which may not be feasible, as we know, due to age and condition of many of the homes, not all, but many. And then moreover, relocating a manufactured home comes with an average cost of around between $10,000 and $20,000. Now, while there are some state funding assistance programs available for displaced homes, there are more significant questions and concerns to address, which is where can we reasonably expect a displaced manufactured home and its owner to go? Homeowners might find themselves then with an asset that they own free and clear, but no available land on which to put the home. So even if they are fortunate enough to relocate to another park with available space and maybe similar space rent, there are still subtle but very real forms of displacement that occur in this situation, such as, for example, with our senior populations. And I do want to note that there's a overrepresentation of seniors in our manufactured home parks. It's a great option for many of our seniors. And so, you know, there's a sense of during a displacement process that can just feel really isolating and, you know, losing a sense of what was familiar in communities. So I think that's something that we should consider.
I must have misheard you or misunderstood. Did you say 50% say they own? But that,
So
wouldn't that be 30% by question 2?
So 85, of the respondents, 85% reported owning their home. And
Some
then,
have a mortgage.
correct, and then of the 85%, 55% reported that they no longer have a mortgage.
So where's
So-
that 55%? Because it, question 2 says like, what is your monthly payment excluding rent and utilities? 30% say does not apply, which I presume would mean I don't have a mortgage or a payment on it. Didn't quite,
Mhm.
I didn't catch the math on that.
So in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong and we can figure that out together as a group. So again, I think in my mind, I was interpreting this, actually Hans and I sat down to look at this together, interpreting this again as out of the respondents, just about 85% said that they owned rather than renting. But then going a little bit deeper, out of that 85% that owns, about 55% of those say they no longer have a mortgage. So the question didn't apply to them because the question was, how much do you pay for your mortgage? And so the respondents, 55% said this does not apply. And so to us, that indicated that at this point they own their home, which is a very likely situation, especially for homes that are, say, much older, that maybe have been owned for quite some time at this point.
Do you know if maybe it's the Department of Commerce information, but it's curious when these mobile home parks close, and as you say, there are numerous difficulties of just physically relocating the home, but finding a place, et cetera, et cetera. How many people move from a closed mobile park home to homelessness? Is there some data collection there?
Let's get some data on that. Yeah, thank you.
It happens. I mean, and that, I think, you know, one of our concerns, not so much in the city limits, but with some of the parks in the urban growth area, especially along Martin Way, is that that's just kind of one step above homelessness. And then, you know, if anything was to happen in those parks, the likelihood of people being, you know,
They
displaced
don't
or
have
being,
$20,000 to move.
right,
around.
is that they're likely gonna end up homeless. So we'll pull together some data, because it does happen. I don't know, you know, what the,
Yeah.
we can find out.
Excellent questions, but yes, it does happen.
They seem to be paying more than you'd think though, so is this truly the most affordable way to live? I'm not sure about that. So is it the closest to homelessness or?
So I think that it can be both. There's so much diversity within parks, and I think we all know that, right? So, and I experienced that going door to door.
Yeah.
Where one home, I was trudging through, you know, waste, right, trying to find a door, literally. And it might be situated right next to a home where that wasn't the case at all, right? Maybe a brand new home. So there's a big diversity. And so I think that parks are chosen. There's a couple of things. Sometimes they're just the only option, and then sometimes it's just the by choice option, right? And a lot of our seniors are in that situation where this is a by choice option, and a lot aren't too. So it really it is dependent upon the individual's income situation.
And I think too is, and if you look at some of the survey stuff and the long form questions in the, or the answers to the kind of open-ended questions in the back, some people just prefer to have their own space, right? So they want to have, you know, their own four walls, you know, and a little space around it rather than living in like an apartment setting or something like that. So there's some of that preference part as well. But
And, you know, realistically, a lot of these people can't get the money together to move into an apartment.
right,
You know,
Right.
you're talking $5,000 to move into somewhere that's pretty small and, you know, the rent's gonna go up.
Yeah.
They don't have $5,000.
Yeah, and not just living paycheck to paycheck, they're in the
Or
red,
social security check to social
Yeah.
security check.
but they're probably losing money every month.
Yeah,
Yeah, I did talk to one woman, I'll try not to go too much into the weeds, but, you know, and we sit here as a group
it's
that
heartbreaking.
is not, yes, we need to be cautious to not, you know, present with a bias, but, it, you know, it was heartbreaking to, be holding the hand of a senior, just, it just was a moment that just happened as she was, you know, teary
Right.
about her situation where her rent was $875 and her, senior, or excuse me, her social security check was like $125.
My God.
And so so she was talking to me about, you know, various ways that she was getting her food and things like that. And yeah, really difficult. So, and then another great survey result that I feel that, you know, gives us some information here is looking at rent burden. So perhaps one of the most informative survey questions was concerning the degree of rent burden among park dwellers. So among survey respondents, nearly 45% reported that their total monthly housing expenses, including space rent, utilities, and any monthly payment on a home, was between 30 and 50% of their total income. Over 28% found that their total housing costs were between 50% and 75% of their total monthly income. And 11% indicated paying 75% or more of their total monthly income on their housing expenses. And only 15% reported their total housing expenses to be between the 20 and the 30% range, which is why we would consider that more healthy. At least right around the 30% range,
So 30% or more is cost burdened. Right,
Correct.
that's the term, right?
above 30%, yeah.
Mhm.
So I feel like this does give us, you know, some good information to be considering as we move forward.
So I feel like I'm coming across as more negative, but I'm just trying to understand the data.
Sure.
How many people in this survey? Because some of these I'm seeing, like, we only have like 20 respondents or 18.
Yeah.
So
So
how
I'm only-
statistically valid can we call that?
Yeah, and you know, and I wish I can't sit here and say that I'm, you know, a data analyst because I'm not. But planners certainly, you know, try to gather a higher level view of things. I only am presenting to you the questions where we had 100 or more out of our responses. So
Oh, these are 100,
Correct.
because these ones here are showing
Correct,
much
yeah.
smaller amounts.
correct.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. I'm trying
And
to- thank you.
also, and we can come back to that at the end because I think there's some reasons why we saw a drop off in some of those questions.
Gotcha,
So
okay,
we can come back
that's
to that.
helpful. Thank
Okay,
you, thank
you
you,
bet.
thank you.
You bet. So yeah, so rent burden, and let's move that forward here. And then, you know, I thought that this was an interesting question as well. We were trying to sort of get at how many people might be living in your home. And, you know, it's always hard with a survey to know the validity of responses, but by and large, out of 100 or more respondents to this question, it looked like most respondents were either one or two persons per home. And so where I found that very interesting is that it's in alignment with broader housing objectives at both the statewide and the local levels. These objectives aim to diversify our housing options within the missing middle category, which we aren't necessarily here to talk about tonight. However, it is important to know that manufactured home parks have played a very pivotal role in providing affordable housing options that, you know, help bridge that gap between apartment and single family homes, much like the missing middle. So I think that that's important for us to, you know, keep within our framework as we move forward. And then I just wanted to share again some comments and concerns with everybody. So I'm just going to read these. I'm concerned that the corporation that bought our park raised my monthly lot rent by 27% effective 1 year after I moved here in 22. Continued high yearly increases will make this home unaffordable for me within a few years. I'm equally concerned that this corporation may sell the park, as has happened already in many parks. I invested all of my retirement savings into purchasing this home. I actually met this woman and it was really interesting to see that, it was great to see that she responded to the survey, but had an interesting conversation with her and again, she, had some very valid concerns. Mhm. And we are all seniors with limited income. I was just priced out of my last 3 apartments. The most recent raised its rent from $700 with utilities to $1,250 plus utilities in less than 1.5 years. There's just no place left to live that is affordable. Manufactured home parks for long-term residents are a necessity due to astronomical housing costs in this area. We are approaching retirement age in a 1-income family, and I worry about losing the park and not having the means to live in another area. And lastly, I own my home. I pay lot rent and utilities, which is about 60% of my monthly income. And that's half the cost. I have a roommate that pays the other half. This is the only way that I can afford a place to live. I think there should be a cap on how much the space rent can be raised annually by the owner of this park. I was protected in California, but not here. There should be rent regulation in these mobile home parks, or individuals should be able to buy their lot.
Excuse me,
Yes.
there must be rent control in California. Is there rent control in the state of Washington?
No.
There is
Bill in
not.
the Legislature, I believe it's 5% in California that you can raise it annually. And that's the same thing I've been seeing over and over again, people telling me that their rents raised several $100s and people having the rents double, being forced out of homes.
Yeah.
And I was actually curious about this. I've been following this because it's heartbreaking to see that I worked in different schools, some that serve people across the state, and it's really hard to have parents crying, saying that they don't know where they're going to be living because their rents have doubled wherever they are. And I was curious because I've been researching rents in this area, and I live right on the edge of Midtown, and so this area is really, something that I focus on because it's my home and my neighborhood, and I love it here. But I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that a recent project that received impact fee, pardons, I don't know what you call this. And I believe that, we reduced the parking spaces that they had to have and gave all these things so they could have affordable rents. But a studio apartment, a studio is $1,350 a month to $1,499, $1,500 a month for a studio apartment. So that means you have to earn $54,000 to $60,000 to live in a studio. A 1-bedroom, $1,850, a 2-bedroom, $2,124 to $2,299 that are available. So that's $92,000 a year income to live in a 2-bedroom rental. And it seems like you're saying like, oh, if we do these things and we remove these things, and if we give these perks, we can make affordable housing. But that's not affordable housing to have $92,000 a year for a 2-bedroom. And just thinking, 7 years ago, you could buy a 3-bedroom on a third of an acre lot. But the mortgage, it's less than what it costs to live in a studio right now. And so I don't know. I mean, I think this is pretty important discussion because people can't afford to live here, but there needs to be something that says that, people that are, I think, investing in our community and building homes in our community need to actually build homes that people in our community can afford, because it's sad to see that people are being forced out. And that's, the legislature has to pass it, but I don't know if there's something that, we can do to actually make housing affordable and have housing that people can buy as starter homes
Yeah.
that actually is, starter homes. And that's really sad that, I don't know whether it's like those 3 or 4 for ones. My neighborhood seems to be like, there's a triplex that just got built in my neighborhood too, but I don't know if those being sold as starter homes, if that's even a thing, so.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points. I think starting with the, what the legislature might do this year, or this session coming up, they'll start in January. I assume that they'll probably take up some form of rent control, will be kind of on the docket for, at least for consideration with the legislature coming up. So that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I think getting back to, your comments about the apartments and whether or not they're affordable, the thing that we've attempted to do is to address that by increasing the amount of supply that's in the market. The market right now is so undersupplied with
Yeah.
housing that even the new stuff that comes on is way expensive, right? So you can imagine if that stuff didn't even happen, how much more expensive this stuff would have been had we not, put in these additional units into the market. But one of the things that you mentioned was, I think, probably getting towards the multifamily tax exemption, which is a property tax exemption applied to multifamily projects in the Midtown area, that people are taking advantage of. And in doing that, it's making projects more feasible, but it's not necessarily reducing the price of rents. And so there's an exemption that gives them a property tax benefit for 8 years, which they're taking advantage of, which doesn't require any affordable component to achieve. There's a 12-year exemption if they decide to go for that one, that says, I think 20% of the units at that point have to be affordable. And I think affordable is 80% or less AMI. So they do have that option. None have taken advantage of that. And I do know that other jurisdictions are now looking at if anybody's doing a multifamily tax exemption, that they actually have the affordable be a requirement. So not just try to affect the supply with getting more units, which is happening now, is also saying, okay, well, now that we've done that, rents still aren't coming down, then and if somebody wants to take advantage of the multifamily tax exemption, then a certain percentage must be affordable. So that's another thing we
Well,
can.
and it's the same forces that are driving those rents to where it's kind of unfathomable how much it is to rent a studio or whatever. But it's those same market forces that are allowing these landowners to say, I can raise the rent. It's all the same thing, that the market's able to bear this, and I can get people to take this mobile home, or I can get people to rent this apartment, even if I say it's $1,500 or the rent is $900. So it's
Right.
the same market forces.
Drive all of that. Yeah.
So I don't know, that doesn't make it simpler, that makes it harder, but it's the same problem.
Right.
Same root cause.
Right.
So.
It's a very complicated, baffling problem, because when you talk about rent control, now talk about market forces, where you're gonna find investors that want to build apartment complexes where there's rent control. So I mean, this is just a conundrum. I'm sure you guys rack your brain about this all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
It's indeed a conundrum. I really appreciate all of you do such great research. It's really encouraging to have this be in this dialogue with you. Yeah, appreciate it.
I mean, to me, I read every one of those comments and I thought, my God, that's a world I don't know, obviously, but it made me want to go out there and say, how can I help you? You shouldn't have to live like this. I don't know what to do, but it's so damn unjust, throughout the whole
It is.
society. It's horrible.
So again, just we talked in our previous discussion as well about, what does legislation say? And do we have any legislation that supports us towards preservation of our parks? And indeed we do. And we touched upon that in our last presentation. And this was just another piece of legislation that I came across, that simply does say preservation of manufactured and mobile home communities is a more economical alternative than providing new replacement housing units for tenants who are displaced from closing manufactured or mobile home communities. And then the legislation also, you know, says should be a goal of all housing authorities and local governments as well. And so the question here is, does Lacey have an opportunity to improve our manufactured home park policies? And I do believe that staff does believe that, yes, we do have an opportunity. And one question becomes, excuse me, I'm sorry, Lacey has options to consider as an independent jurisdiction, as well as possible opportunities at a regional scale, for example, with the Thurston County Regional Housing Council. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment as well. Almost done here. So one thing that that Gordon's research brought forth was that a potential course of action that we should consider moving forward would be there again, zoning specific to manufactured home parks. This is a Tumwater's map. I stole that off of their website, just for fun and to just show that, you know, here they've got the designation, and it's just working along with all the other designations that are on the map. And so we could consider this. Several cities, not just Tumwater, have gotten out ahead of park closures by doing this. And I think I mentioned last time that Tumwater actually implemented this, I believe in like 2009, might be off a year or so on that. So those zoning can be changed through an approved process. As we all know, this would still provide some longevity for many of our local parks who are vulnerable.
So just tell me how that actually works. We would enact a rezone on those existing parks to zone them as mobile home parks.
And have that be like the only use that
The only
is
use,
allowed in
okay.
that zone,
Yeah.
so that they couldn't be converted to other
Right.
uses.
Now that,
Derelict
But they
parks,
could
I
be
mean,
converted,
should
right?
every park be converted and saved, or the ones that have a substandard living conditions?
That's a great point.
that's a great question. And my next thought was, you know, whether all parks should be rezoned is a question that's going to require further research and more informed research as well. And Gordon, I think that was part of his presentation is, you know, again, not all parks are equal. Not all parks have the same risk of closure. There's many variables that feed into that. And so it might be worth us revisiting some of his research at some point in time, or just taking that further to the next step. But great question. And, you know,
So explain a little bit more about the risk of closure. So the ones that are fairly high end, shall we say, have less risk of closure, but the ones that are, is that true? Or the ones that are
Let's go back. So
substandard perhaps
it's
have
back
more
quite a
risk of
ways.
closure?
Let's go back to this slide that has
yeah, perfect. There we go.
the space rents on it.
Okay.
So
yeah.
great question. And there's lots of variables that feed
Sure.
into that. And I may not know how to actually answer that specifically for you. Ryan might jump in and do a better job than I would. But there's lots of variables. For example, when you look at the approximate cash flow, that is a variable that we really look at. And so when you see, for example, Mountain Greens is cash flowing at $1.88 million a year. That's deemed as in the green there as a very low risk of being closed because it's got a high cash flow.
Yeah.
It's very attractive to the current owner or to maybe another owner who wants to dabble in park management. Some of the others though, where you see, like
So this one, you know, has a relatively low space rent, a relatively low cash flow, a relatively poor condition. The risk is the highest, right? So that's kind of the scoring methodology that he used is kind of like based on the cash flow, the value of the property and the condition of the property, then that kind of all adds up to being, you know, we've got 4 parks here that are essentially at the highest risk of conversion. It's not necessarily closure, it's conversion into other uses.
Other uses,
Somebody
right.
could sell it and, you know,
Well, it's
remove.
essentially closure.
Well, it is, but it's not just like close it, not open it up. It's conversion into something else, right?
Sure, we're gonna
So,
build a higher.
yeah, yeah.
So
Right.
could we, as a city, could we change the zoning? If it's, we could, because there are currently mobile home parks, so you could change the zoning to be consistent with the current usage. It's not like you're changing the zoning to something different than the current usage.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yes.
And then, so the city, could they also pick and choose?
Yep.
And that would be potentially subjective, I suppose, and
Right.
at risk for the city if some are being selectively done
Right.
with zoning changes
Right,
versus
so,
others.
you know, there's a couple things that we would need to, this would need to be a part of a fairly robust process. One thing we would need to do is reach out to the residents directly as well as the ownerships and, you know, apprise them of this as a potential, you know, option. As well, you know, there some, not so much in the city, but some in other locations are, you know, the whole park itself is fairly derelict. And it may have a high level of risk to convert, but maybe that conversion is probably the best thing to happen to that park because
For
they're in
those
such,
people.
yeah, they're in such dire straits. So that's another thing is we would need to, you know, look at, okay, maybe some of these that are at the highest risk are actually ones that should be converted into other uses because, you know, they are substandard living conditions that we essentially need to encourage, you know,
So beyond that.
their evolution into another use.
Is there a way to, this just sounds so restrictive, but is there a way to enforce through some city regulation, I don't know, a better standard of living in those communities that are
Yeah, and maybe Jennifer.
on the back end?
Yeah,
Kinda get
yeah,
to some of this in your presentation.
yeah, almost there. Another great question. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and move on to here. So we could potentially do some zoning. And then one thing that we are kind of in process of exploring, and this is not, this was just a photo that I found and is not specific to a park here, but I will say, after canvassing all of the homes, this is not uncommon. I saw this and I saw much worse than this. And again, often in a nice park. So we have been kind of investigating what a potential partnership could look like for some extra garbage service or some extra waste disposal. And so we've met with LeMay, who is absolutely on board to have a partnership in terms of LeMay would supply containers to a site that the city identifies. And leave the container there for whatever time frame, a week, let's say, and then they would pick it up. The city's portion then would be to perhaps pay the dump fees. I can get you some numbers on that, but they were fairly reasonable, maybe like $120 per ton or something like that. So we started looking at that and it was feeling really good and warm and fuzzy because I thought, well, this might be something that we could maybe do once or twice a year, offer this as something to maybe sort of help assist people that are finding that they've got some barriers, whatever those might be. However, and maybe this is a great group to bring this to, is that this question goes a little bit maybe beyond what we can accomplish with just a program. In other words, we might be getting into waters of mental health conditions, other barriers that a program alone can't solve. So even if we put a container in front of a home that could definitely use it, how do we get somebody encouraged to actually get their items into the container, right? So that could really disjoint that attempt or that process. And so further discussions, you know, among our staff have been, you know, what do we continue to investigate this? Could this be a partnership if maybe we had some volunteer efforts or, you know, maybe we had a little bit of staff time? So we're not quite there yet, but feel like this might be something really worthy of exploring. To your point of
How do we fix it?
and how do we stay in line with our overall comprehensive vision as the city of Lacey to provide safe and sanitary living conditions? Because I'm of the belief that if we saw these conditions in a multitude of other neighborhoods, there would be measures taken to
Do
mitigate.
these places have HOAs?
That's a good question. Yes, but I would say that most
They're
of
not
them are
very-
not enforced. Yeah,
The park management is gonna be the ones that
park
enforce those
management what?
park rules.
the
Park
park
rule.
manager, yeah. So most typically there's, in most situations, there's an on-site manager in some capacity, not all, but some.
An off-site manager.
An
Off-site,
on-site,
an on-site
yeah.
manager.
And so they would be responsible to enforce whatever those, covenants or rules are,
Mhm.
but there is.
Which they do or don't.
Yeah, or they try in many situations. I've, started to develop some relationships with a few of the managers and they're trying, there are some that are really
It
trying.
would, it would seem to me that long-term, one of the things to do, first of all, like, if in fact they're zoned mobile home park. So the risk of that being sold out from under them is less to some extent. But then to develop in the people who live there, who own their own homes, 80% of them presumably, an active HOA where they could help enforce the rules. I mean, I think they don't, the mindset is not there to do that in these places because they're struggling. But they don't see themselves as a force if they're united with a homeowners association that makes things work in the park. And
I
yeah.
don't know if, after the research I've seen on HOAs, I don't know if they're altogether beneficial, seeing that an HOA can decide to charge someone for having litter in their house
Yeah, but
and then
most
charge
of
them and charge them. If there's a mental health issue, then they can price that person out, purchase the home from underneath them and force them into homelessness.
Yeah, no, but I
So
think
there's-
they're also
it's
doing a
not
lot of
always
good
the
things.
best
It's
solution.
not the best solution, but it is a solution. It makes them more proactive about where they live, I think,
I think
than
that we're seeing these through the filters.
of our.
So I see this as the filter of this would be, I would feel terrible, but a person like this brought this trash home.
Yeah.
They're not gonna be inclined, I see an HOA or covenants in my neighborhood is maintaining my property value.
Mhm.
If I don't own the land or something, I may not be as
Yeah,
motivated.
that's true.
So I think we have to check ourselves as far as looking at for the filter of how we would see a neighbor like this or whatever. So I love the idea, but just because we think
Yeah,
Exactly.
that old mattress maybe needs to be thrown away, they may not agree or see that as an issue. So
Absolutely agree. Yes.
I think there's a lot that would love to have that cleaned up, elderly, disabled people, that kind of thing, that really can't do it themselves.
yeah.
And then there's the whole other side of the equation, those that just don't care. But there's a number of them I would imagine if the volunteers came along and were willing to help them out, they'd be willing, they'd be
They'd be
thrilled
willing,
about
sure,
that.
certainly. Another thing too, and this was not part of my presentation, but there have been a couple of fires recently in some parks in Lacey. One of the fires, I believe, was started by arson, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, that did take out 3 homes. And this type of situation, to me, feels concerning as a citizen in our community, as a safety issue. Absolutely.
can I ask
But, you know,
thanks,
people
Ryan.
in here
one more
talking about
question?
rats
Yeah.
and-
about the mobile home park designation though, if you're a greedy owner of that land and you change the zoning and now that's their only option, unless you tie that with some sort of rent restriction, you've basically just given them license to continue to increase the rate, the
Yeah.
rents, correct?
Yeah, changing zoning does
Doesn't.
nothing to
Correct.
address.
All
that.
it's gonna do is maybe stop them from selling
converting.
it. Yeah, and so, but it's really only hitting a small piece of the
Right.
pie
The
that
whole
needs to be
problem,
addressed.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I
Just
thought
clarity.
the owner had to request the rezone,
No,
so it
the,
could be rezoned.
the city can rezone
irregardless.
property, and that was part of actually the Tumwater one. So Tumwater did that and they actually went to court and won because they unilaterally, well, I don't want to say unilaterally, they changed the zoning, they made the findings and the conclusions to change the zoning there without the approval of the property owner. And so the property owner said, wait a second, you're doing this against my will. They went to court and Tumwater actually won. So they've set precedent that this is,
And
Legally.
wasn't it,
Legally.
it was Mountain Green residents that approached us initially.
it
wasn't
was,
Yeah.
right?
Is it precedent setting at what level of court?
It went to the Court of Appeals, so it's not a
They
Supreme
take it to
Court,
The Supreme Court.
but.
Hey, Ryan,
Yeah.
what uh, is this presentation gonna eventually reach the city council in some fashion, like a work session?
Yeah, so I think, we're gonna get into slides here about our comprehensive plan update, so chances are this is something that could be like something that we do maybe for a joint meeting type presentation, probably
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this merits, a good look by the council also to because I mean it's deeply concerning. We know on some of the stuff that eventually we would hope to annex that they're on those properties also.
Yeah.
So planning ahead is much better.
Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so just about done. What's next? Park preservation is a multi-layered concern that will take numerous strategies for us to make any significant change. So critical conversations should continue around best paths forward for our local parks, residents, and our city's future in maintaining existing affordable housing that serves so many people in our community. As the planning process is underway for our comprehensive plan update, that will include both the land use and housing elements. This is really an opportune time for us to be having these discussions and for staff to continue research and hopefully to come back with some recommendations for some policy changes or revisions. And that's really about it, other than just wrapping up with another comment that I appreciated. Please help keep our park open. Most of us cannot afford to move our homes to another property. It would be a terrible hardship and could result in additional homelessness. And thank you for helping us. So that's all I had for you. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any sense that if we start talking about this, if we start talking about this zoning for a mobile home park, that will potentially drive the problem in the wrong direction, that some of these places will then say, I better sell quick before I don't have a choice?
Well, they could sell regardless of
Yes,
whatever
they can,
zoning,
right.
they can sell at any time. I guess the risk is like conversion and
Right.
we've been approached by the Mountain Greens residents at Points about potentially doing a moratorium of sorts on, because they feel like, well, if somebody could just drop an application for a subdivision where we're, currently a park, what happens? And that, the feeling is, at least, from our part, is that the risk is pretty low at this point. I think that the evidence is that the owners are making a good income and that there's probably not a lot of incentive to sell at this point. But if there were, then I think that's something that we would have to look at and see if we did enact, some kind of emergency measures like a moratorium. But that's kind of a worst case scenario, right? We don't want to do a moratorium to prevent something that may not occur, like as a preventative measure. We only want to do it as an emergency measure.
Hey, can I ask a question, Ryan? Do we have any idea in the city of Lacey, any properties that have been encumbered by let me use an example. There's that area that they had to pave over by, I'm going to say over by Cabela's, but it's not really by Cabela's. It's behind that smoke shop that's right by the freeway that they had to pave over because it's contaminated from lead or something, or something that there was a firing range there once sometime.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we could look for properties within the city that we might entice a developer to develop into some nicer mobile home, manufactured home kind of situations?
You know, that could be another part of our analysis is, you know, what properties might actually be available that we could, you know, market for those purposes. My feeling is that they're gonna be pretty few and far between.
Mm,
So, you know, another thing we can look at is that we just kind of generally have run out of property for most,
yeah,
regardless if it's a mobile home park or a manufactured home park or a, you know, yeah, subdivision, single family houses, you know, we used to do, you know, 1,200 single family permits a year and now we're, you know, I don't know, maybe this year we do a couple hundred.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, those are running pretty thin. You know, we're not gonna probably do that for much longer. So everything, you know, everything at this point is pointing towards other development.
Sure.
Multifamily.
Well, that wouldn't fit towards building up either. It's still just spreading out.
But it does provide a more affordable option and, you know, getting back to kind of like the opportunities for ownership. There's an ownership opportunity if even within a park, you still own your unit. And, you know, the starter home market just does not exist. And, you know, things like this, like condos are kind of those alternatives that the first step and you know, the housing, you know, the ownership housing rung to get into. And so they still provide a really important part of our community. It seems like late, you know, in the last 20 years, give or take, the only parks that we've had developed are 55 and older parks. So they're age restricted. Nothing that I can think of that is open to, you know, to anybody that wants to live there.
That was another comment that I saw, that people bought into a community that was 55 and then all of a sudden it's all ages. Is that
Yes.
something that they can just do, or
Yeah.
once they set a covenant, it's not
It's,
a-
if it's a park rule, that's just something that can be done by the change of, you know, the management or the ownership. You know, the only teeth we have is for the newer parks that are 55. So that was Mountain Greens, I think, which is a park was developed probably long before, you know, Lacey incorporated it. So the newer parks, such as the one on 37th that I mentioned, the Detroit Park, Lakeview Meadows, we actually have restrictions because they have not paid school impact fees. They've not paid those things. So if they were to ever open that up for anybody, you know, less than 55 years old, they would have to kind of break their agreements. We'd have to go through those agreements and they'd have to pay school mitigation fees and those kinds of things. So the newer parks, we have that kind of taken care of. The older parks where they were just part of the park rules, yeah, those are just, they can be just changed with the ownership or the management.
Jennifer, you did a great job. I think it was really nice to put a face on this.
Thank you.
And such, so I think it gives us a perspective. I would love to see it like backed up by maybe census data or something so that we can corroborate it, excuse me, but I do think it was really nice to put a face on it, and I know you put in some miles
And some miles, and again, you know, just what a great experience, honestly.
thanks for
we probably owe her a pair of new tennis shoes, Ryan.
at least a visit to the shoe shop.
Just curious, we keep talking about water and septic systems. So our mobile homes parks, are those on septics? Or
So some
Some are.
in the UGA are more, my assumption is that the city parks have all been connected to city services. I was in one park though that was expressing to me that there are multiple homes on one septic system that is the original septic system from pre-1970, and that is very concerning.
We talked as well about with this, getting back to the cooperatives that have formed to buy their own parks. One of the big risks for these cooperatives is that when they buy these parks, that the infrastructure usually is very substandard. And so then all of a sudden, they've purchased these parks and then have to put the upgrade, you know, costs on the back of their residents, which is really concerning, because before that would have been the responsibility of the ownership, and they would have paid, you know, with that through increased rents. And now when it's owned by the parks, their only choice is to really put that on the, you know, the current ownership, which is those residents.
So
And
it's
so it's
not
creating
like, it's not like a single family home that you have an inspection on and they have to upgrade it before you agree to buy it.
Right.
It's not like the.
right. There's, you know, there are no required inspections. they have to essentially do their own due diligence to kind of figure out what the condition is of all of their utilities, and, they're taking a substantial risk that some of those things, because they're underground, you don't know what's lurking under the ground, that they could have some significant issues.
And if their drain field fails or whatever, that would trigger probably a sale,
Yeah,
rather than them absorbing the cost of
Cost of it.
redoing an entire septic system.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a pretty penny. I have to do that.
Okay. So again, Jennifer, thank you for all the data. I think you've intrigued us even further, which may mean some more walking on your half of things. But obviously you can tell the interest of the Planning Commission. We asked lots of questions. It is deep in our mind about people being able to afford to live in Lacey. And so thank you very much for your report. Communication announcements, anything for the good of the order? Okay, so our next Planning Commission scheduled meeting is October 17th. And we look forward to seeing you all in person. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Change of day would take place